Good morning, everyone. I'm joined today, I'll introduce my guests first of all. I'm joined today by Hussein Naki, who's the Senior Vice President of International Development at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Next to him is Keith Wachtel, Executive Vice President, Global Partnerships at the NHL, and Giles Morgan, Global Head of Sponsorship and Events at HSBC Bank. We're here to discuss the globalisation of sport, which obviously is a huge topic. In a sense, obviously, sport is the global language anyway. It touches everyone. Everyone has a sport they're interested in. And it's often a point of contact that you can, if you can't talk about something with somebody, you can always talk about sport or an aspect of sport to them. At the same time, the world's almost a smaller place. Travel, media, technology has made it easier for people to get around the world, watch sports to transport themselves around the world. And the markets are huge. Obviously the financial side of it is massive. Sporting interest, the cultural and social aspects of it are great as well. And I thought a good starting point with these gentlemen, especially with two guys from America, is the sports you obviously are involved with, hockey, American football, are very identifiably American sports. How do you tackle the issue of making them more global appealing? Do you want to start first?
The Jaguars have a great infrastructure in that the NFL has been here for a while, and if you look at the people who attend the ISG, the international games at Wembley and now at Twickenham this year, only about 4% of them are expats, and only about 30% of those attendees are from London. So there's a really significant group of fans out there who are American football fans, who've been American football fans for a couple of generations now. And, if it's up to us now to grow that organically, it's really difficult to have a sustainable strategy around, just Americana coming to town. We need to have organic growth, and Mr. Whittingdale's comments earlier about sort of grassroots growth and trying to grow the game from the bottom up is something that we're really focused on, and I think we have an opportunity to expand American football through participation.
You mentioned grassroots growth. How would you go about that?
So we've developed a game that is a sort of a modified version of American football called JagTag. We're in 4 grade schools right now, looking to partner with various charities to grow that. And we have we launched it in January of this year, and we have about 600 kids playing American football on a weekly basis, and it's the only in the schools that it's in is the only school where it's a co-ed. It's the only after-school program that is co-ed, not by design, but because that boys and girls have decided to play it. So, for us, it's about making the sport accessible and making the sport sort of improving the quality of it. We'll have a camp up in Loughborough that we're bringing our American football coaches over to coach university level players, and we'll have a national 7-on-7 tournament in October. So we're doing a variety of things to try to get the whole spectrum of folks who either haven't touched the game or who play it on a regular basis at an elevated level to try to improve both the coaching and the participation side of things.
Keith, what's your thoughts on this?
The interesting thing for the NHL is that we are clearly perceived as a North American sport. Yet 26% of our players come from Europe, make up somewhere around 13 to 14 countries depending on the year. So clearly our opportunity as well as our challenge is to globalize the sport, certainly over in Europe. And that's something that we've come in and out with various games, exhibitions and regular season games over the past 8 or 9 years. We've played a few matches at the O2 here in London and throughout Sweden and Finland and other markets where NHL is prevalent. But that's really our opportunity, being perceived as an American sport, yet with the amount of players, and not just 26%, but 35+% of the All-Stars. So there's a real opportunity, and we just need to figure out how to unlock the magic key to help globalize the sport.
Because the influx of foreign players obviously is a big thing in lots of sports, football in particular. But you found that has helped in terms of your profile around the world?
It has. the problem for us is it's a very long season. And what's interesting about football here is the exhibition tours, right? So when you see Man U and all of them coming to the States and playing matches against MLS teams throughout the summer, it really has broadened the sport. We're going to be conducting the World Cup of Hockey, which our sport allows us to do a big event like that this coming September in Toronto. But we'll have broadcasts all over the world. And that is probably the impetus for us to begin a very aggressive growth strategy in Europe and throughout other markets that we think make sense for us.
Giles, you obviously come from a slightly different point of view. What's your sort of take on the issue?
Well, I think it's fantastic that sports are coming in and globalising, whether it be NHL or NFL through franchises. I think what is vital for any sport, wherever it is trying to colonise, if that's the right expression, is to make sure that the sport is credible and it's real sport. I think exhibition, particularly for fans, after a while, it's quite good as an introductory basis, but I think after a while can become offensive in terms of, is this real sport? Are the protagonists really playing? We see last night 2 football teams properly playing football. That's what engages, that's what's passion. So I think as sports go to different parts of the world, you look at sports growing in China, you see it growth in India, as well as here in Europe with say, American sports. As long as the product is proper, credible sport, then if it's of interest to people, they'll grow.
So you're talking about competitive games, really. I mean, obviously one of the easy things that lots of sports franchises do around the world is sort of friendly matches, tours, that sort of thing. But you think it needs to be more competitive, really? Well,
I've spent a couple of years living in Hong Kong, where Hong Kong has one quite credible sports event, the Hong Kong Sevens, which is incredible because it's not just a sports event, it's also a party for people to spend 2.5 days in light oblivion. But what happens on the field of play is a very credible sport that is growing. But I also went to watch Argentina came and played in Hong Kong, an exhibition match, and frankly it was a disgrace. They didn't want to be there. They were being paid money to be there. They were there to show off to the Hong Kong community in terms of playing football, and you'd think Argentina. It was awful. It wasn't real sport. And that's what I think, maybe just as a purist, I think people like the binary nature of sport, which is winner-loser. And as long as people are playing to the best of their ability, it doesn't really matter what the sport is. So you look at the Olympics, we all become instant experts on minor sports for 16 days every 4 years, because we know that the people who are there at the pinnacle of their sport competing at a level that they really, really care about. And I think that's what fans and followers of sport most love about sport.
So Hussein, we're seeing that in American football, aren't we, with games being played in London, competitive matches, Jacksonville Jaguars are playing. How has that been received in America? Is that accepted as something that is inevitable if you want to make the sport more popular, or has it been a bit of tension there over that issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of those conversations sort of happen at the local fan base level. I think as a general proposition, NFL fans, to the extent that there's any homogeneity to that name, I think sort of accept the fact that internationally is sort of the next frontier for the sport. In Jacksonville, we've been very transparent about why it is important for us to play in London. We take one of our home games every year, a regular season home game, to Giles' point, to play it at Wembley. And that is, playing here makes us stronger in Jacksonville, because our relationship with this game is a little different than any of the other participants in the other 2 games, because we actually take P&L risk on the game. So we retain the revenues, we have expense exposure, but because of the average ticket price, because of the number of people who attend games at Wembley, we retain significantly more revenue from a game at Wembley. So, and we've been very transparent with that fact with our fan base in Jacksonville, so they understand that there's a real business rationale to why we're doing it. And for us, the Wembley game represents about 15% of our local revenue at this point, and we've only been doing it now for 4 years. So it is material and an important growth element and stability element for us.
What about hockey? Can that happen with hockey as well, that teams will come and play competitive games abroad?
Yeah, again, we've done that sporadically, and you know, at the end of the day, you know, I think Giles is right. You know, exhibitions are nice, and it's great to have NHL teams go around and play a team from the Swedish Elite League or the DEL in Germany. But at the end of the day, they want to see the players playing against, you know, the best. They want to see that the game matters and that it's important for the standings. But you have to make an investment. As Hussein was saying, it's very expensive for football teams or American football teams or hockey teams to come overseas because of the size of the teams, the equipment that is involved. It's not just getting on a commercial flight, it's chartering planes, and the cost gets significant. But at the end of the day, you have to make the investment. You either have to say, we're going to be here, we're going to put boots on the ground, we're going to be here for a consistent presence, not come in and out. And that's always the trouble. Exhibition games are easy to do. They're less expensive. But at the end of the day, if you really want to build a sport in a market, you have to be there. And you know, the Jaguars are a great example of that. They have an office here. And whether or not, you know, they play one game, you know, at least one home game a year. But they've made the decision that it's important for the brand and it's important for the business. And ultimately, that's the model.
Giles, we're talking about globalisation of sport, but is Asia really the key market, you think, for sports?
Well, it is from just population point of view. So up to 2/3 of the world live in Asia now. So, but it's more than population. It's to do with middle class growth and consumption, and you're seeing that massive growth in China and India in terms of the growth of the middle class, which is the traditional consumption area for all sport, and you've seen that over the years. So, yes, it is, and you're seeing great strides being made in China within football, both through imported football, if you like, and also domestic football. And we have some experience of it in a very much smaller game with golf, where, to the point that Keith was making, is we've invested in golf in China for, well, what, already 13 years, certainly another 5 to come, where we brought the best golfers in the world to play in a World Golf Championship. It's a proper golf tournament, it's credible golf, but then also invested in grassroots, and now we're beginning to see Chinese players coming through on the European Tour, on the Asian Tour, and winning. But that's generational. It takes a while for that to come through, and I think certainly for brands, but also for sports, if you're going to invest in a new market like NFL are doing, like NHL are doing, which is fantastic because the more sports, the better as far as I'm concerned. It's about people enjoying sport. You've got to be in it for the long haul. But undoubtedly, the growth of sport, as we see it globally, is going to be reflected a lot in Asia. And I think that will change from more domestic leagues and more credible sport, rather than a lot of, as I say, Argentina turning up in Hong Kong for a kick around for guys who weren't fit, weren't really wanting. It was wrong.
Yeah. Because you mentioned domestic leagues as well. You were talking about the Chinese Super League before, weren't you? I mean, obviously, can that be done in parallel almost? You improve the domestic league, but also bring in foreign franchise or foreign teams visiting and
foreign teams or foreign players.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the Premier League model, and as you see, the Bundesliga model. I mean, that's how leagues have grown, as you bring the global superstars. Is there enough money in China to support the growth of soccer stars coming over, rather than playing maybe at the end of their career, but playing halfway through? Yes. And if the decision is made by the Chinese Super League to do that, and money talks, and clearly in football it does, then there's going to be a shift. What's interesting, and again, we saw it last night, I caught the second half of the West Ham game, is, and you see this in the US and in North America, the one thing that's hardest to replicate in sport is traditional fan support, where you've got generations of people going back, whether it's Boston Red Sox, whether it be West Ham United or whatever. And that's certainly something in Asia that's harder to replicate, true fan base. Yes, you can have celebrity base of famous people, you know, the Beckham effect, etc. But I think anyone who's a true sports fan, particularly in team sports, where it goes back traditionally, is that sense of fandom. And that's something that you can't just buy. That takes a while to build, and that's why building, you know, most football clubs didn't set out to be marketing brands. They were football clubs that were in their local community that have evolved, and that takes generations.
And is that frequency of visit and presence on the ground as well that becomes the kind of key drivers for that, as well as obviously playing the matches?
Well, we think so. The repetition of appearances and having, you know, permanent, in quotes, presence here, I think is important, right? It sort of gives credibility to the business proposition. It gives credibility to the value proposition for fans, for potential partners, and it shows a real commitment, right? It's very, very difficult, to Keith's point, to sort of do any sort of material growth or organic growth by proxy. You sort of have to, I think you kind of have to be here, because, I have a goofy accent, and for me to sort of try to have a goofy accent over the phone and try to grow football over here is even taller order than doing it in person. In order to sort of understand what makes people tick here, still haven't figured that out. But to the extent that you can, and sort of understand what are the triggering aspects of organic fan growth and real fan growth, you have to be immersed in the culture, I think. And it's been really enlightening, and it also illuminates very clearly the challenges that we have. European football is such a dominant presence here, and sort of overshadows so much of what any other sport tries to do, that you sort of, then it forces you to calibrate and really think about who are the sort of the best people to sort of go after initially.
Keith, why does it matter? You've got such strong brands in your own markets in the US. So why do you need to be global?
Well, owners want more money, right? So at the end of the day, I think, and going back to one of the points, I think, if you look at what the NBA has done in China, it's pretty amazing off the heels of really one player, right? And they call it the Yao Ming effect at the NBA. I mean, they really had the perfect storm in the ability to bring the NBA to China, and forget how many people are playing basketball over there, and 1.4 billion people are hard to ignore. When you think about in Canada, which is the dominant country for hockey, there's 30 million people. So imagine if you can have any sort of passion whatsoever in China for the sport of hockey. And with the Winter Olympics coming to Beijing in 2022, there's a real opportunity. But I bring up Yao Ming because I think it was talked earlier, how to develop fans at the grassroots level, but ultimately trying to develop athletes. If you are playing, at least in our sport, and I'm pretty sure it's probably most sports, if you play the sport, growing up, you're 10 times more likely to be a fan of that sport, and you also bring about 10 other people into that sport, whether it's your family members and friends. But if we had if there was several European players in the NHL, in the NFL, it becomes that much more interesting. When we go to Russia, it's the biggest sport, Sweden, Finland. So right now, the first Chinese player was drafted this past year by the Islanders. If he ever makes the team and has some longevity, now you can literally build a sport off of that athlete. Same way that you were talking about golfers, and that's the key. So what you're doing with at the grassroots level, well, it'll be tough to break through European football. When you get that first player who grew up watching the Jacksonville Jaguars and decides he wants to be an NFL player and plays in the NFL, it'll be a lot easier to grow the sport in London or elsewhere. And I think ultimately it's not just a revenue opportunity. Our sports are global in some form or fashion. There are fans everywhere. It's just a matter of cultivating that fan and getting them to do more with the sport. And again, that's kind of how you build it. So I think it starts with again, trying to grow your sport, but also, again, there are revenue implications, and owners are looking for new ways to drive revenue.
Giles, from your point of view, obviously you're involved with sponsorship and so on. Do you look for sort of opportunities that give you something slightly more unique? And obviously Hong Kong Sovereigns is so identifiably HSBC. How do you go about looking which sports and which things you'll get involved with?
Well, it's really boring because it's about us in the first instance. So it's about our business objectives and our brand objectives. So we kind of figure out what customers are after and what markets we want to be in. So that's the boring bit. And then the beauty pageant happens and lots of people come to us with great ideas, and we're obviously going to have that conversation afterwards.
We will, yeah.
I know, it's inevitable. And I think you got a lovely accent too.
So is yours.
Thanks. It's going well. from our point of view, though, we are an international business. So one of the reasons we've got involved in Rugby Sevens is, yes, Hong Kong is one of our home markets. The Hong Kong Sevens is by far and away the biggest sports event in Hong Kong. So that was natural, but we're also sponsoring what's called the HSBC World Rugby Sevens Series, which is the series of sevens, which is interesting because it's a very small sport. Rugby isn't nearly as big as rugby thinks it is. It's played by a lot of countries, but it's not actually that big. You know, the big countries that play are probably 12. But sevens has the ability now to grow the sport. You're seeing if America catch on to sevens, they've got their tournament in Vegas. The powerhouse that is American sport could absolutely dominate the game, and we're hoping the dream final at the Olympics would be Fiji, who've never won a medal, versus the USA, where you've got that massive North American audience. But what we're trying to be involved in it as a business, that kind of as a metaphor of a catalyst for growth in international markets, is we're trying to grow golf and rugby, but trying to differentiate to your earlier questions. That lots of great sponsors are involved in rugby, in financial services, not many involved in sevens.
Yes.
So we're trying to get into new markets, into Singapore, into Canada, into the USA to grow. But it takes a while, and we'll have to be in for the long haul.
Keith, if Giles wanted to get involved with hockey, he couldn't put HSBC on the shirt, though, could he?
Thank you. That was easy. Thank you.
But he couldn't be a jersey sponsor or anything, could they? That doesn't. How does that work?
So, you know, that concept is new to North America, unfortunately. The NBA just announced that they're going to put jersey patches for the first time on their jerseys, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm not so sure that a 2x2 inch patch is gonna do a lot. Certainly,
we could negotiate that.
Right. Certainly, we're happy to put a big patch. HSBC would look really nice. I think inevitably that, and you asked before about why expand. I mean, you know, there's only so much more that the big sports can generate from a revenue standpoint. Ticket prices are already so high. Signage is sold out. Most teams have sold out season tickets, so they're looking for new revenue streams. The kits in football, I mean, if you think about it, it's so common here. We're going to test it at the World Cup of Hockey by putting two brands on our jerseys, home and away jerseys, in bigger fashion. And that will at least begin the dialogue for hockey. You know, what's interesting for us is, you know, for a sport that will celebrate its centennial, we're 100 years old next year. You know, our sweaters are really special. You know, and everyone says that, but they've been around a long time. Very hard to think about taking the Maple Leaf or the Canadian or the Blackhawk or the Rangers or the Bruins off of the front of the chest because it's so identifiable. And the notion of putting a brand there and moving it, I think at some point is inevitable for all sports. I think we wanted to see how it works with the NBA. But at the end of the day, it is a valuable position. And if marketers want to support that, it's something that we have to really consider and look at. I think, again, in North America, it will take a long time before we end up with the traditional jersey kit that you see here. But those are all the things that people are looking at. I think the other big area is technology. I think the opportunity for all of us in our sports, as well as with marketers, to look at how to bring the game closer to the fans, whether that's through broadcast technologies, tracking, in our case, the puck or the ball, tracking the players so that we can not only provide coaches with more tools, and again, they're doing it right now in football.
Yeah.
You know, in a lot of ways, football is so far more advanced in all these areas than we are in North America. But I think technology is the next big opportunity for the North American sports to really not only generate more fan interest, but generate revenue opportunities.
Why do you think that is the case that football is sort of still on the march? Because traditionally you'd expect American sports, obviously very televisual sports, very advanced sports, quite technical sports as well, to have been ahead of football. But do you think you've fallen behind?
I certainly think in the branding we have, and in some respects, I think a lot of it just has to do with the nature of the relationships between the properties, the teams, the broadcasters. I mean, there's a lot at play. It's no different than anywhere else. but I feel like some of the sports in outside of North America have done a better job of aligning all of those different entities in order to build it together. I think that the lifeblood of certainly North American sports is broadcast television rights, and everyone's very protective of those rights because at the end of the day, until that bubble bursts, we all see the continued growth in that area. So from that standpoint, everyone's very protective to make sure that continues, the value of those broadcast rights continue. So I think, again, by putting a big logo on a jersey, you do it with 30 teams, how will that impact broadcast revenue?
I think it's quite interesting that I think sports sponsorship in terms of companies getting involved through technology is going to grow. And the reason being is advertising is so shifting now as we all become self-editors.
Yeah.
If we, just normal television, even live news is not the bookend 9 o'clock, got to watch the live news because it's 24 hours streaming. Same time people are now self-editing. They'll watch television, they'll watch their own favorite crime program when they choose to. The one thing you can't choose is live sport. You have to watch live.
Yes.
And therefore that real-time experience is the thing that you can watch as live, but it's not the same. People like to watch the sports as it's happening. And that from a marketing point of view, from a brand point of view, is a fantastic opportunity because you're booking your visibility with people who demographically you've presumably done your job and identified who they are.
Yeah.
And I genuinely think it's so interesting that's happening in North America because I think it has to follow that brands are wanting to get in front of people and their passions. And it's harder now for advertising. I mean, most of the advertisers are now doing content-generated programming, which is different. They're creating entertainment rather than monologue because, if you get onto an aeroplane now, even sat there in a captive audience and you've got 4 minutes of TV advertising, you'll fast forward, get to the film. Whilst with sport, you can get there, you sit on your armchair, you sit in your armchair at home. It's real, it's there. And that's a real opportunity for both the rights holders and also for sponsors and investors.
Yeah, the one thing I hear all the time from marketers is don't just sell me a logo, right? Don't just sell me brand awareness. Now, some marketers who are either launching new products or new companies, that's what they want, and they'll buy big exposure opportunities. But at the end of the day, most of these companies that are buying sport don't need brand awareness. So to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a logo patch, what else are they doing? How else are they marketing it? And that's why you see a lot coming off, right? They'll buy it, they think it's great, or they want the brand awareness. But then once they have it, CEO sitting there going, why am I spending $30 million to put a logo on there? I don't need that anymore. I can think about what I can do with that money to activate against the consumer.
I'm going to open up to questions in a minute, but I've got a couple of quick questions for Hussein. Firstly, Keith talks about the difference it makes to maybe have a foreign superstar, a player coming in, like you mentioned the Chinese basketball player. Is that something American football's looking at? I mean, for example, are you going to try and convert a rugby union player in England to be an American football player?
Yes.
Okay. Who? No, but I mean,
stay tuned.
Is that clearly a strategy you'd like to pursue?
Absolutely. Yeah. No. I mean.
And secondly,
please.
Secondly, do you see an American football franchise being permanently based in the UK?
First question. Yes. I was being a bit glib, but clearly, one of the things that I've noticed, didn't take a rocket scientist to figure this out, is after the Super Bowl to the start of our season, there's a pretty significant dead period of discussion around the NFL. My personal view is that if you were able to find a really elite athlete, whether it's rugby or whatever the appropriate sport is, to make the conversion or to drop his sport and come play in the NFL, I think there's a really interesting opportunity to be able to prolong the conversation on a year-long basis. We've been in talks with a couple of very, very prominent rugby players about dropping their sport and coming to us for two very different reasons. It hasn't worked out quite yet, but I am really bullish on that as a strategy because I think it's a really interesting way as well to sort of teach our sport through somebody who has credibility within this marketplace, who has notoriety within this marketplace, Keith makes the exact right points on that point. That if you have somebody that can take the fan base, sort of the sport fan base here, through that journey of their training, of them sort of understanding the intricacies of NFL football or hockey or whatever the case may be, you're that much better off, of course. On the franchise question, clearly, I think that the opportunity is there, of course. I have no idea if you can put a timetable to it. It's not tomorrow, certainly. I don't think the market is ready quite yet, but it is getting there very quickly.
Good. Do we have any questions? Yes, the gentleman over there.
Thank you. It's Callum Murray from Sport Cal. I'm a journalist. A question for Keith. Looking at your job title up there on the screen, and you mentioned also the 2022 Winter Olympics in Beijing, it sounds like you should inevitably be in favour of NFL players taking part in the Winter Olympics. But once again, that debate has come up. What's your view, and how is it likely to be resolved?
Probably I'm going to answer that and go round and round without giving you an answer. Look, I think the Olympics is obviously the greatest international competition in the world. And as a marketer, you always obviously want to look at what the big opportunities are. But the big difference for us when it comes to the Olympics versus other sports is, we have to shut down our season. At the end of the day, the NBA will go to the Summer Olympics and the season's over. It's hard to ignore, again, the games being played in Beijing in 2022, again, given the population. But that'll play itself out. I think that at the end of the day, we know the players want to be there. I think that there's as you can imagine, a lot of politics when it comes to the Olympics. But I'm going to let people with a much bigger title and answer those questions over the next 6 to 9 months.
Do any more questions? The gentleman over there.
Thank you. Simon Long from Repucom. My question is one of balance. I'd be curious to get the panel's view about how to manage the delicate balance between sports that have been built in one country and have aspirations globally, and how to keep them personal within the different territories you go to, but also how you then balance the traditional television opportunity with emerging technologies and personalisation through media such as the internet, coming shortly after a reputed $10 million deal with the NFL and Twitter. So I'd be interested to get your view on balance.
Go ahead. Give the client perspective.
No, I think you should go first.
Okay. It's interesting. I think we're using the World Cup of Hockey to actually test a bunch of different opportunities. Like I said, the jersey branding. The other is a company from London. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Suppenor, who has created some unique signage opportunities in football. We're looking at them for our sport to be able to, as you said, personalize, although this is from a messaging standpoint, but personalize messaging by country. Whenever a sport emanates from a certain location, that's the branding that marketers see. That's the voice that people hear and see. And a lot of times, most sports, certainly outside of their home country, broadcasters are just taking a feed and they're showing the game on how the host country wants to show the game. And I think the opportunity is to really personalize it. I think when you're watching the World Cup in Sweden and you're seeing US companies or Canadian companies and that's really all you're seeing, you don't feel outside of the team that's playing any connection. And the technology that we're talking about with Suppenor would allow us to speak to Swedish fans, not only in native tongue, but with native brands. Doing the same thing in Russian, doing the same thing in Finland. And for us, I think that's how we try and personalize the game. Obviously, broadcast would be the best opportunity to personalize the game. we all have such loyal and passionate fan bases. I don't see the risk of losing those fans at home because of the things that we're trying to do around the rest of the world. I don't certainly think we want to take for granted our existing fan base. But quite frankly, I think they'd want to see, NHL fans would want to see the sport grow globally. I think they would feel really excited about the fact that more people are engaging in a sport that they love. So from that standpoint, that's how we would look at it.
But also, I think if you look on the history of any sport, golf is probably from Scotland, and the Scots are very proud of golf. It's a long time ago, but it's a global game now. Most sports came from somewhere, and over time, that internationalism will happen. This is just happening in the modern era. But I think if you take them, and I think the English are enormously proud that many of the sports come from the sort of 1850s of this country and have emanated. But football is the global game now. But it is an English public school game originally. It's moved on. And so I think, what's key is, are the sports good? NHL, NFL are great sports. They're great to watch. They have huge fan bases in their home countries because they're exciting, because they innovate. Therefore, there's every chance that in new markets they'll evolve. No reason why they shouldn't. It's to do with the quality of what people have the choice to watch.
We're actually quite fortunate in that people come to our game because they want a slice of Americana in some respects. That from the feedback that we've gotten, people who come to our game, whether they know the game well or are just learning it, are coming because of the kind of the showmanship that the NFL I think does really, really well. And so for us, if we were trying to depart from that, I think that would be a significant deterrent in terms of people being able to come or really enjoying the game. You mentioned the Twitter deal. I think that's you have to go where the eyeballs are, and particularly as you try to reach a generation that maybe cord cutters or whatever euphemism you want to use. I think that is a perfect example of us trying to customize our product to people who consume it differently than, sadly, I was. I'm old now.
Do we have any more questions? No? Okay. Obviously, just one last question from me, really. What do you think are the key sort of factors in terms of global appeal, and also is there a saturation point that could be reached with some sports? If you want to go first, Keith.
I'd like to believe there's no saturation point, certainly for sports in general. I think that there's certainly room for growth for the NHL at home in North America, but certainly around the world. So I certainly don't think there's a saturation point. But I think we need to innovate. The other thing you asked about, right now, people can consume sport wherever they are in the world, just through their devices, right? Everyone has the packages that fans can watch live games on their phone or on their tablet. So there's really no borders anymore. And there's a large world out there for all sports, and it's a matter of figuring out how to capture that audience. And again, if you can get one fan to buy a jersey, it goes from there. And the ability to attract fans, especially today's millennials, they're very fickle. We're going to have an esports panel. Who would have thought Twitch would be the biggest thing that people are talking about? So from that standpoint, there is a huge opportunity, and you need to adapt because certainly the consumer is changing rapidly.
Charles?
Well, I think the traditional sports are the sports that have to innovate to that point to keep relevant. Golf's going through a bit of an identity crisis, for sure, in terms of how does it resonate to the modern generation. But maybe one of the most staid of all the sports 25 years ago in cricket, in terms of its format, how it was played, how it was broadcast, was pretty old-fashioned, hadn't moved on. If you now look at what the Indian Premier League are doing, what the World Cup, it's moved. It's become one of the most innovative sports. So it's about protecting the tradition but moving forward. So it's exciting for sports franchises to keep relevant but maintaining their tradition.
Yeah, I would agree with both of those points. I wouldn't necessarily say that hopefully there isn't a saturation point, but I think that there is a point where you can become tone deaf as an organization and not appreciate the fact that you need to you need to shake the rust off and speak to different groups differently. And there is obviously a great deal of sensitivity to broadcasters, and that needs to be preserved, of course. But that shouldn't necessarily be done at the consequence of losing an entire generation of fans who may consume the sport in a very, very different way and a very short period of time. Not spend 3 hours watching an NFL game, for instance.
Well, I think we'll end it there. I'd like to thank my panel, to Giles, Keith and Hussein, and thanks for your time as well. I hope that was informative. Thank you.
Thank you.